It is Josephine Beintema here, and today we're going to do a first chapter reading from Stranded with the Billionaire, Book 6 of the Ramesly Brothers series. So this book is a lot of fun, and we kind of deviate a little bit from what's been happening, and yet we learn more about what's going on with David and the rest of the family as they plunge ever more into the Ramesly Brothers drama. So, this one is about the tabloid reporter, and we meet a new Ramesly brother. Well, he's a cousin to the original brothers, but anyhow. Whoa! Welcome to the wind aspect of the video. Okay, chapter 1. She was really going to do this. Sterling handed over all the cash in her purse. It was a considerable amount. The bank teller had eyed her with surprise when she requested to withdraw it. Now the entire amount was going to be an investment for the biggest story of her life. In return, the flight attendant held out a uniform. "There's no name badge. You'll have to say you misplaced it." The woman pursed her lips and watched Sterling with skepticism. "You read the manual that I sent you?" "I read it," she lied. She'd skimmed it. It really wasn't that complicated. Sterling grabbed a bundle of clothes and went into a stall. They were in the bathroom at the airport. She quickly began to strip. Besides, if he figured out she was an imposter, it wasn't like he could just land the plane and kick her out. He needed to get back to the city ASAP. "I hope you studied it. I could lose my job over this," she huffed. "If anything happens, you need to know all the protocols." "You said yourself that it's unlikely anything will go wrong." Sterling rolled her eyes. "It's perfect weather out. The pilot is experienced. I just served the passenger a couple of drinks, smile pretty, and snap some photos. No big deal. Besides, all you did was call in sick. You have no idea who would replace you." The flight attendant sighed. "I'm going to bitterly regret this." "Think of that vacation you've been looking forward to." Sterling slipped on the skirt. It was such a sexist outfit. Why she had to wear the knee-length skirt and pumps while handing out drinks on a plane and reminding people to put on their seatbelts was beyond her. As it was, the pumps were going to kill her feet. Sterling was a sneakers kind of girl, much easier to chase down her quarry with. Now she was going to be chasing down Jake Ramesly, the ever-elusive bachelor who was even harder to get a picture of than Michael Ramesly, and Michael valued his privacy to the extreme. There were only 2 public photos of Jake, one in an old GQ magazine where the entire business conglomerate family had been present, and one file photo for Ramesly Insurance. Now Sterling was going to have him all to herself for a 6-hour private flight. Her mouth practically watered at the thought. She was going to do a lot more than snap photos. Not that Sterling was going to tell the flight attendant who had so thoughtfully provided her with the uniform. She handed over a month's worth of wages for this opportunity, and Sterling intended to have an exclusive that would catapult her career. The bonus would be more than make up for her investment. Rumor had it that Jake was on his way to help the Ramesly family deal with the latest disaster. His father, Robert, and Uncle David had been arrested by the FBI for smuggling drugs into the country on a staggering scale over decades. David had been released recently, and his son Michael would now be in FBI custody, charged with the same crimes. Not that the general public knew that yet. Sterling's article would hit the stands tomorrow morning, enlightening everyone to the latest in the Ramesly family drama. Sterling would never have believed it. Michael didn't seem the type. Yet the FBI must have something if they were arresting him. Her source had been adamant that he would be arrested tonight, so Sterling had made up the article and submitted it to her boss, Ray Grange. She would continue to press her contacts. If Sterling could keep ahead of the regular papers with the breaking news regarding her favorite source of income, Ramesly drama, then she would be earning more money than anyone could dream of. She might even be able to make a book out of it afterward. Sterling tugged on the jacket to get it to sit right. It was too tight. "Are you ready yet?" the flight attendant asked impatiently. "I need to check you over. You'll have to look the part or the pilot won't believe it." Sterling opened the door. "Help me with this silly little hat. Do you really wear it?" 2 minutes later, Sterling was pronounced good enough to pass inspection. "Remember, the pilot's name is Richard Merriweather. There is no one else on the flight besides the 3 of you. Don't screw this up." The flight attendant gave Sterling a critical once-over. "Stop worrying. No one will know that you were involved in this unless you tell them." Sterling grabbed her purse. She set a thick layer of red lipstick on her lips. "There, I'm all set." Sterling shot the flight attendant a triumphant smile and quickly exited the ladies' room before the flight attendant could get any ideas about raising her price or having any remorse. Sterling needed this to work. It had been a bit of a long shot trying to set up this little operation and managing to fly out of here on time to get on Jake Ramsley's personal plane. The timing had been tricky. The fact that it was coming all together was like a shot of adrenaline for her. Sterling made her way to the correct gate, showing her ID and borrowed pass to a security guard. New here? The guard barely looked at Sterling's fake credentials. She had spent hours with a backstreet fake ID specialist to make sure the airport employee card was perfect. Yes, Sterling smiled as she took back her card. She didn't volunteer any other information. That was where most other reporters got in trouble when they were trying to scope out information. The more a person lied, the more likely they were to be found out. Sterling told the truth wherever possible. Sometimes she just embellished it a little. Only a little. Not that Sterling was a real reporter. She worked for a tabloid. That meant she was the scum of the reporting world, even if she had outscooped some of the biggest newspaper competitors in the city. Have a nice flight, the guard motioned her through. He was as lax as the flight attendant had mentioned. Perfect. Sterling gripped the handle of her small luggage case and purposely walked down the corridor. She passed through some automatic doors and walked across the tarmac to the plane. Everything was going well. Sterling climbed the steps and entered the plane. It was small compared to the large commercial flights she was used to. Then again, it was a private plane, beautiful, detailed inside, with leather seats and nice decor. Jake had hired the plane since the Ramesly corporations didn't own one. Sterling wondered why he hadn't just flown on a commercial flight like everyone else did. Then again, he was a Ramesly. It wasn't that she had anything against the family. They were her bread and butter most days. If she had the money, she'd travel like this all the time, too. Sterling stashed away her single suitcase. She grabbed the pre-flight checklist for the flight attendants and started to look busy. She was in the middle of checking the fire extinguishers when the pilot, Richard Merriweather, came on board. "Good evening," Richard smiled at her. He was a distinguished-looking man in his mid-50s. "Good evening," Sterling echoed the greeting. She shook his hand and introduced herself. "Sarah Hawkins." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hawkins." "Richard Merriweather. Weather looks good today." He stowed a small bag away. It appeared the pilot traveled very light. "Indeed," Sterling smiled as he made his way past her to the cockpit to start his own pre-flight checks. First hurdle done. Sterling continued with the list. Anything she didn't quite understand, she put a check mark beside. She wasn't about to admit her ignorance. It was only a 6-hour flight, so no meals were required to be served. All she had to do was fake it until they were well on their way. Footsteps came up the steps. Sterling turned to have a look, and there was Jake Ramesly, immaculate in a suit, coat draped over his arm, laptop case in hand. For a moment, Sterling could feel her heart flutter in her chest. That was silly. She'd never been nervous around any of the celebrities that she chased down for a story before. Jake Ramesly wasn't even all that famous compared to his cousins. Sterling had every intention of changing that come tomorrow when she wrote her next article. "Richard, good to see you again," Jake greeted the pilot with a nod. He turned to Sterling. "Nice to meet you." "Sarah Hawkins," Sterling held out a hand to greet him. "Miss Hawkins," Jake said briefly before he handed her his coat. Sterling blinked. She'd meant to shake his hand, not do coat service. However, she pasted a smile on her face as he went to take his seat. She was invisible, just part of the help to Mr. High and Mighty Ramesly. That was fine. It would suit her purposes not to have him pay her any attention to her. She put his coat and single luggage case away, ignoring the sandalwood smell. Just because he was tall, dark, and smelled good didn't mean that she was going to give him any mercy. Sterling had a job to do. Jake settled himself with his laptop and phone out, ignoring Sterling and Richard as they went about their duties. His phone rang, and he put it on speaker while he continued typing. Jake Ramesly. Sterling couldn't believe her luck. She tried to be as inconspicuous as possible as she listened to the conversation. "They've arrested Michael," a voice said from the cell phone. Jake stopped typing. "What do you mean, they've arrested Michael?" "The FBI. They've searched Michael's house, seized his boat, and have taken him into custody," came the reply. "Anne is beside herself. What are we going to do?" "Get him a really good team of lawyers," Jake was grim. "Dylan, how's Dad?" "He won't talk to me," Dylan responded. "Why?" Jake asked. "I don't know. I asked to see him, and it came back that he didn't want to talk to me. Hopefully when you get here, he'll talk to you." Dylan was frustrated. How did this even happen? What possible reason could they have to become involved with drug smugglers? We run billion-dollar businesses, not illegal activities. None of this makes any sense. Jake grimaced. "You said Michael had arranged a family meeting?" "Yes. Michael had proof that money was being laundered out of Ramesly Pharmaceuticals. Have you checked the Western Division accounting? I've got a team of auditors looking over Ramesly Insurance Eastern Division right now, and they've uncovered some disturbing things. It is possible money has been laundered through our company as well. Slow down, Jake advised. We don't know that for certain until a complete audit is made. I'm worried the FBI is going to ask for our financial records before we're even fully scratched the surface. There are over 30 years of records to go through, Dylan sighed. I'm concerned about what we could be left open to in this investigation. We did nothing wrong, Dylan, Jake said reasonably. We can't be charged for not knowing what Uncle David and possibly our dad was up to. Dylan had a short laugh. We are the heads of this company. We are open to liability and thus charges if the FBI deems it necessary. That's part of the job. At the very least, we should have been apprised by accounting of discrepancies. I'm pretty sure ignorance isn't an acceptable defense. Jake knew that Dylan had a habit of imagining the worst. It was a strength when Dylan prepared properly for the worst and everything in between. It was also his weakness when Dylan was paralyzed by his fears. Dylan's first marriage had been something of a disaster, resulting in the anxieties he now bore. Jake was waiting to see how his second marriage went. However, it appeared that Dylan was happier with his new wife, Kelly. Dylan deserved some happiness after all he'd been through, in Jake's opinion. Let's not borrow trouble, Jake responded. Right now, we audit, we get the lawyers involved, and we try to figure out how to help Dad. Sterling noted that he wasn't worried about helping his Uncle David. Perhaps Jake was leaving that for his cousins to sort out while concentrating on his own father. Sterling wondered just how deep each Ramesly was involved in this. It sounded like Dylan and Jake were innocent of being involved in the drug smuggling if their conversation was anything to go by. Or perhaps just Dylan was innocent and Jake was keeping his youngest brother in the dark. Have you heard from Everett? Dylan asked. Just that he would be flying in soon. He promised to contact me once he had an appropriate arrival time. Approximate. This is what happens to you when you read really fast. He promised to contact me once he had an approximate arrival time, Jake replied. Dylan, it will be okay. We will get this sorted out. I wish I could believe that, Dylan responded. Look, I have to go. We're having a shareholders meeting and I'm going to be in the hot seat trying to calm some nerves over Dad. I'll see you at the airport. Give me any updates by phone. The last thing we want is the FBI misconstruing something through an email chain, Jake frowned. I'll see you soon. They said their goodbyes and ended the call. Jake worked diligently at his computer, so Sterling had a moment to jot down a few notes on her cell phone. She hadn't learned much, but her source at the FBI had been right. Michael had been arrested. Ready to go? Richard pleasantly asked Sterling. Sterling fixed a smile on her face and shoved the phone into her jacket. Absolutely, everything checks out. Great. If you'll close the outer door, I'll let the tower know we're ready to depart. Richard went back into the cockpit and Sterling breathed a sigh of relief. She turned to the door and studied it a moment. It wasn't like a regular door. There was a huge handle on it. Sterling grabbed the handle and pulled the door in, then shoved the handle down and felt it click into place. Giving it a push and a tug, Sterling noted it was secure. Thank goodness. The manual she'd skimmed last night hadn't said anything on how to lock those doors, and Sterling knew they couldn't fly with it open. Suddenly, she felt a little worried. Maybe she should have taken the time to read the manual properly. Maybe even watch some videos on YouTube or Googled procedures for flight attendants. Little things like closing a door could potentially trip her up and blow her cover. The last thing she needed was to be discovered as a fraud before they even left the airport. Her boss would eat her for dinner and spit her out. As much as she was the tabloid's rising star, Sterling had no illusions as to Ray Grange's loyalties. He cared nothing for his workers, only the bottom line of the paper, which was selling them to make money. In a world where things were going digital and paper was going the way of the dinosaurs, Grange was constantly pushing his writers to make things more edgy, exaggerated, and sometimes using lies to make a profit. Sterling had managed to not lie on any of her articles. Sometimes she went a little far, she would admit that, but her writing style and suggestive comments had managed to save her from outright lying in the paper. It helped that she had started the articles on the Ramesleys and the drama had been recently unfolding, making her job a little more secure. Yet if she didn't keep giving articles that sold, she'd be out on the streets in today's job market. Most people didn't look on tabloid writers as very employable. Her best bet would be to move into the fiction market, writing books. First, Sterling needed to get as famous as possible so people would recognize her name when she ultimately made the career switch. She was not going to be at Ray Grange's beck and call forever. At some point soon, she would be able to escape his demands and inappropriate comments. Sterling reminded Jake to fasten his seatbelt. Before quickly taking her own spot, she clipped the belt together as the plane started. A chirping noise came from her phone, and Sterling looked up to see if Jake had noticed. Instead, he was focused on his own electronics. She probably should have reminded him to put them away, at least during takeoff. However, he also should have flown enough flights to know better. If he got whacked in the head for his own carelessness, was she really to blame? She was probably going to make a bad flight attendant, Sterling reflected ruefully as she pulled out her phone and checked her messages. One of her sources at the police department had just tipped her off that Ted Searson had died of anaphylactic shock, an allergic reaction. Sterling's fingers flew over the keys of her phone as she quickly pressed her sources at a prestigious medical center where Ted's doctor was to learn if Ted had any known allergies. She didn't like the timing on this. Ted could have become a potential witness against David Ramesly, except now he was conveniently dead. Her eyes widened as the next message came through. David Ramesly had been released. How was that even possible? Sterling scrolled down the message, reading as the plane began to speed up down the runway. David had agreed to testify against his son Michael, brother Robert, and Ted Searson in exchange for immunity. He wouldn't need to testify against Ted anymore, Sterling reflected. She'd included the possibility that David might testify against the others in her tabloid article on a hunch. She was amazed that it was correct. It didn't feel right. Sterling felt that if any of them were guilty, it was David. She had met David Ramesly at a fundraising dinner at Mercy Hospital. He was arrogant, rude, and smug. David gave the impression that he could do or say whatever he wanted without any repercussions. Sterling felt that he was the epitome of all that was wrong with rich old men. They thought they ruled the world and everyone else was simply there to serve him. Sterling detested those types of men. A chime alerted Sterling to the fact that the seatbelts were no longer a requirement. Shoving her phone into her pocket, Sterling unclipped her belt. With a smile fixed on her face, she reminded Jake that he no longer had to wear a seatbelt and asked if he would like anything at this time. Thankfully, he said no, which was a good thing because Sterling had yet to familiarize herself with everything that was on the plane. If he'd ordered a whiskey or something, she wouldn't even know if they had any in stock. Vowing to ignore her phone, Sterling began to poke curiously into cupboards, shifting things around until she knew where everything was. Jake ignored her. Sterling ignored Jake, somewhat. He wasn't conveniently handsome. He might be tall, 3 inches taller than Sterling's impressive 5'10" stature, but he was a little thin. He also had a craggy face. Whatever that really meant, Sterling didn't know, but she decided the word craggy suited Jake. Maybe if he ever smiled, he might be handsome, but right now he was simply serious and all too male. Sterling tried to ignore him while waiting for any morsel that would fit into her next article. She wondered if she should start asking annoying questions in a clueless fashion to see what he might say. Deciding to save that for later, Sterling poured herself a small measure of white wine and enjoyed it in the tiniest kitchen she'd ever been in. That was saying something, since she'd been on her Uncle Jim Bob's motorhome and it had a miniaturized kitchen all its own. Sterling had come a far way, from a tiny nothing town, perhaps 800 people if one was being generous, all the way to the big city as a writer. Okay, tabloid writer. She could handle that, as long as it kept paying the bills and catapulted her career into something higher. Wait, were flight attendants allowed to drink on the job? There was no way to pour it back into the bottle without making a mess. Plus, it was the good stuff. No way was she going to pour that down the drain. With a grimace, Sterling kicked back the last of the wine like a shot. She sighed over the fact that she'd barely gotten a good taste of the last large gulp. Rough day, a voice said from behind her. Sterling gasped and turned around. Aren't you supposed to be flying the plane? Richard had a smile as he reached past her into the fridge for a bottle of water. Autopilot. Yes, but if something goes wrong, Sterling gave him a speaking look at his chair that was just visible through the cockpit door. Don't you need to be there to fix it? Relax, Richard shrugged and uncapped his bottle. Nothing is going to go wrong. Sterling watched him return to the cockpit with a wary eye. She could see the headlines now. Pilot jeopardizes billionaire Jack Ramesly's life for a bottle of water. Richard would probably get fired. Then again, it wasn't that the headline was as good as Ted Searson dead in jail after possibly poisoning from best friend and pharmaceutical chain owner David Ramesly. David releases FBI frames son Michael for father's deeds. Sterling grabbed her phone and typed in a few headline ideas and the start of a new article. 3 hours later, she had outlined a couple of article ideas, penned an article, and had managed to snap a couple photos on her cell phone of Jake without his being any the wiser, and she was distinctly bored. Jake had not received any more calls and was assiduously working away on the laptop. Sterling decided to ask Jake once again if there was anything that he required. This time, she was able to get him a bottle of water. How dull. She grabbed a glass, put some ice, and brought it, a coaster, a napkin, and a bottle of water over to him, setting it down on the desk. No one would ever complain about that level of service. Just the bottle is fine, Jake said distractedly. Sterling kept her smile pasted on and whisked away the ice, napkin, and coaster. She entered the kitchen, putting the items away, taking another small sample of wine for herself when she heard a curse from the cabin. Hurriedly gulping down the wine, Sterling tossed the glass into the bin and went to the cabin. "Sir, is something wrong?" Jake glared at the computer screen. No. Something was very wrong if his expression was anything to go by. Sterling really wanted to know what he was looking at. She looked at his water bottle. It had barely been touched. Jake probably wasn't going to the bathroom anytime soon. Maybe she could. If she just innocently looked at the screen as she walked past... "Have you ever heard of Sterling Denver?" Jake disgustedly asked. "She's a tabloid writer, isn't she?" Sterling responded with just the right tinge of curiosity and confusion. "Yes," Jake practically spit out the word. "A friend has sent me tomorrow's article, and she's outdone herself again. How does she know these things?" Sterling eased herself to stand beside Jake and looked at the screen. There was tomorrow's article that she had just submitted a few hours ago. Michael Ramesly arrested by FBI. Boat seized, house ransacked, pregnant wife Anne in tears after Michael Ramesly was arrested last night by the FBI in a drug smuggling investigation. Rumors that Father David will turn against son, set to testify against Michael, Robert Ramesly, and family friend Ted Searson in return for immunity. Searson is accused of attempting to murder his own daughter Bethany, who is rumored to have moved in with Detective Andrew Colburn Ramesly, illegitimate son of David. What a soap opera! Can the Ramesleys withstand the drama as the stocks of the family companies take a dramatic dip? Or will this be the ruin of a once powerful and wealthy clan? Sure, it was a little dramatic, but everything was factual. She'd written far more inflammatory articles. "I'm sure she has sources somewhere," Sterling offered. "She's a menace to society," Jake growled, "feeding off others people's pain." Really? Were they really in pain? They had billions of dollars, the best legal team that money could purchase, and would probably be able to buy their way out of any conviction. If the FBI thought that they were guilty, there was a very strong probability that they were. Well, David, Robert, and Ted were guilty. Sterling didn't believe that Michael was anything but a fall guy. Then again, it wasn't like she looked at all the evidence. Nobody would except a jury. "I think she's entertaining," Sterling ventured. "She ought to go to jail for libel," Jake snorted. He switched the screen to some boring data analysis reports. She would never go to jail for libel. Sterling asked the lawyers downstairs all the time how much she could push the envelope before being sued. Rolling her eyes, she headed for the front of the plane, where a scene outside the window caught her eye. There were mountains with trees. Lots of trees. Rather close to the plane. Sterling frowned. Getting closer to the window, she peered out. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, alerted by her behavior that something was amiss. "I think you should put on your seatbelt," Sterling said with some trepidation. Those trees were blurs as they whipped past. They were definitely getting closer. She pushed away from the window and tried to push down the panic growing inside her. "Excuse me?" Jake looked out the window. He gasped in disbelief. "We were supposed to be past the mountains hours ago. What is going on?" "Put on your seatbelt," Sterling repeated over her shoulder as she opened the cockpit door. "Richard?" Richard was slumped over the controls, his fingers spasmodically clicking buttons. An odd sound escaped him. A shriek escaped Sterling. She grabbed the pilot, yanking him upright in his seat, holding onto his heavy frame as his eyes rolled up in his head and he slumped limply against her. The weight of Richard's body caused Sterling to stumble, and she grabbed him firmly. The plane began to dive. Pushing Richard back into the seat, she sat on his lap and grabbed the thing that looked a little like a cross between a joystick and a steering wheel, pulling it back on it ever so gently. Sterling took quick little breaths, scared out of her wits. "What are you two doing?" Jake glowered in the doorway. "This is not the time for kinky stuff." "I think he's having a heart attack or something," she practically yelled at him. How he had headed half a huge American corporation when he couldn't see what was happening right now, or follow simple directions by putting on a seatbelt and staying seated, she didn't know. There's no one flying the plane. "You're flying the plane," Jake frowned at her. "I'm not a pilot," Sterling growled. "Now slap him around or something so that he'll wake up and do his job." "I don't think that's how it works," Jake looked at Richard. "He's turning blue. Do you know first aid?" Which meant that Jake didn't know first aid. Sterling took a deep breath and tried to remember back to the single course she took back in high school. "Can you fly the plane?" "What? No!" Jake looked at her like she had an alien growing out of her head. "Just grab the stick thingy and hold it steady," Sterling pointed. "Easy." "And when we want to land or turn?" Jake reached out and held the steering mechanism. Sterling squeezed between Jake and Richard. "Well, radio air control, and I'm sure they can walk us through it." At least she hoped so. That was, if she could figure out what the radio was. "Haven't you put in a mayday?" Jake asked a little desperately as the plane swooped a little. He tried to hold the stick steadier. Richard fell halfway out of his seat, pinning Sterling's legs against the co-pilot's chair. She grunted and tugged on the man, laying him flat on the floor. Kneeling beside him, Sterling pressed her cheek near his nose, trying to feel for any breathing noises. "Isn't he breathing?" Jake asked as he carefully sat down in the pilot chair. Sterling tried not to roll her eyes. "Concentrate on driving the plane." "I think it's called flying the plane, not driving," Jake corrected her. "Excuse me, grammar police." Sterling put 2 fingers to Richard's throat, trying to find a pulse. She moved her fingers around, but found nothing. Great. She was going to have to bluff her way through CPR. Sterling tried to remember what to do. "Okay. Tilt head, pinch nose." "What are you doing?" Jake questioned, as the plane took another swooping motion. Sterling swallowed hard as the contents of her stomach didn't appreciate the maneuver. Maybe she shouldn't have had those 2 glasses of wine. "I'm trying CPR, if you would just shut up and drive the plane straight." "I am flying straight," Jake said defensively. "It's turbulence or something." "It's every time you turn around to see what I'm doing," she shot back. "I bet you can't look at scenery and drive straight on a roadway either." "I don't have to. I have a driver," Jake countered. "And who looks at scenery anyways?" Jake Ramesly was exactly the guy who needed to look at scenery and remember that the world was not all about him and data sheets, Sterling thought. She took a deep breath, sealed her mouth over Richard's, and pushed air into his lungs. Or she tried to. The experience left her own lungs and throat aching as no air moved anywhere. Sterling lifted her head and looked down at Richard with puzzlement. She tilted his head, pinched his nose, opened his mouth. Was there something she was missing? "How's he doing?" Jake inquired as another swoop happened, followed by a couple of smaller swoops. "Just dandy," Sterling said sarcastically. "He's ready to get up and fly the plane." "No need to be rude," he responded. "Stay up." I don't know, but we're having real trouble with the camera today. Sterling moved her knee for a better position and found something hard. Distracted, she gave it a glance, pulling a large round mint out from under her knee. Looking around, she could see other mints scattered on the floor. "No," Sterling breathed. "What?" Jake asked with some alarm. Sterling ignored him, got to her feet, and raced for the first aid kit. Grabbing a flashlight, which was stored with the kit, she turned it on and came back to Richard. Tilting his head, she looked down his throat as best as she could. She didn't see anything. "Ew." Sterling screwed up her face and stuck her finger down Richard's mouth, trying to see if she could feel anything that shouldn't be there. "What?" Jake asked again. "What is it?" "I think he choked on a mint." Sterling kept feeling, and it was rewarded with a hard surface. Maybe it was his tonsils. Maybe it was the mint. How was she supposed to know? Was she supposed to do the Heimlich thingy on an unconscious person? Although if he didn't have a pulse and wasn't breathing, didn't that make him a dead person? Sterling gulped and tried to quell her nauseous stomach. She had her finger down the throat of a dead guy. She'd had her lips on a dead guy. "Do something," Jake ordered. Sterling gave him a dirty look. Not that Jake could see it since he was flying the plane. Her eyes widened as she looked out the window. "Is that fog?" "Clouds, I think," Jake responded. "I don't think we should fly into that." Sterling felt a fissure of fear dance its way down her back. "How do I avoid it?" Jake gave her an incredulous look. "Move the stick," Sterling motioned with her hands. The plane took a dive. "Not that fast." "Would you like to drive?" he groused as he pulled back slowly on the steering mechanism. "I thought you were flying, grammar man." Sterling decided to try chest compressions. Maybe they might dislodge the mint, since she couldn't manage to get it out with her finger. She mumbled a few lines from an old song of the Bee Gees. "Are you singing Staying Alive?" Jake turned and looked at her in utter surprise. "Watch where you're going," Sterling huffed as she pumped Richard's chest. "It's to keep time. Otherwise I could sing Another One Bites the Dust by Queen." "You're demented," Jake said as he swung back to look out the window. "The beat of the song is the optimum rhythm for CPR," Sterling shot back. It was one of the few things she remembered from first aid, other than wrapping her dummy up like a mummy with her group. They'd wasted 42 rolls of gauze in the effort and scribbled all over the guy in permanent marker, declaring it a body cast and calling him Dummy Mummy Meets Tree on Ski Hill. The teacher hadn't been amused. "It's all right. It's okay. The ambulance is on the way. It's all right. It's okay. EMS will save the day," Sterling sang under her breath. "You got a mint stuck in your throat, but don't take note, because I'm keeping you alive. Keeping you alive." "What are you doing?" Jake demanded. "I don't remember the words, so I'm making up new ones." Sterling was starting to sweat and run out of breath. This was hard work. "Can you figure out where the radio is and call it a mayday?" "Is that your job?" "I'm a little busy," Sterling puffed. Wrinkling her face, she wiped her finger down his throat again, hoping to find the candy loose so that she could just grab it. No luck. "Mayday, mayday," Jake said into what looked like an old CB set. Nothing happened. "Did you press the button?" Sterling asked. She remembered her brother used to have a set of walkie-talkies where you had to press the button to speak. Yes, Jake grabbed the steering wheel suddenly with both hands as the bad patch of turbulence hit. The three of them bounced around the cockpit. I don't think I should be doing both things at one time. It's like distracted driving. Not like anyone is going to give you a ticket 15,000 feet in the air. Sterling grabbed Jake's seatbelt and began belting him in. What are you doing? Jake twitched away from her. We're putting on our seatbelts before either one of us is seriously injured. Sterling leaned in close to clip the belt. A fissure of awareness went through her as she put it down to their situation. Everyone knew senses were heightened during an adrenaline rush. Right now, she could smell Jake's cologne, and it was heavenly. I thought I told you not to go into the clouds. 'Cause there was a choice, right? Jake growled. What about the pilot? She pushed away from him and got into the co-pilot seat as another round of turbulence hit. Clutching her seatbelt, Sterling quickly fastened it. Richard's dead. How do you know that? You can't just give up on him. Jake was white-knuckling the stick as it bucked in his hands, and the plane jumped up and down. He is, and I did, Sterling said shortly. She grabbed the radio thingy and pressed the button. Mayday, mayday. Nothing happened. See? Jake said triumphantly. Sterling rolled her eyes. She fiddled with the dials on the radio, and it emitted a burst of static. Mayday, mayday. This time they heard static and nothing else. Sterling repeated the call, then fiddled with the dials again. Wasn't there a frequency they should be on? Is there a book on your side? Sterling ruffled through the co-pilot area, looking for any sort of manual that might tell her what frequency to set the radio at. I don't have time to look for a book, Jake said firmly, nor is it time to be reading something since we have a plane to fly. I meant we should look for the radio manual. I'll do it myself, Sterling huffed as she undid her seatbelt and started looking through all the compartments in the cockpit. As she found manuals and checklists, she skimmed through them, tossing what she didn't need on the floor. Shouldn't you know where the list is? He questioned. You're the flight attendant. This is pilot stuff, Sterling said curtly. She had no idea if a flight attendant was supposed to know where everything was in the cockpit. The good thing was that Jake didn't seem to know either. The plane jumped and bucked. Sterling fell, knocking her knee on the console. Ignoring the pain, she grabbed at anything to keep her in place as the turbulence threw them around. Jake made an inarticulate noise as the clouds parted to reveal the side of a mountain dangerously close and coming closer as they flew towards it. Pull up! Sterling shouted as she launched herself into the co-pilot chair, struggling with the seatbelt straps. Pull up! Jake yanked on the stick, and the plane tilted, pushing them backward into their seats. And that was Chapter 1! So, Stranded with the Billionaire, Book 6 of the Ramesly Brothers series by Josephine Beintema. If you'd like to find out what else happens, go to Amazon.com or .ca or .wherever you live, and go check it out. Best way to find me is by searching my name, Josephine Beintema, and you can get it in ebook or paperback. Have a great day.